Hey guys, welcome to another MapleStory video. And in this video, I think it's better if you just minimize the entry as a podcast video. The footage on screen right now is just gameplay for the most part. It's just me continuing the assassin quest line. I really didn't want to do everything that I do with live commentary, so sometimes I might do just a little bit of off-screen playing, but I'll use it for footage in the background, or I might do live episodes. We'll see how it goes. Now this video is going to be I'm going to be doing it all in one, well, not one take per se, but it's a live commentary. I don't have a script for this, which means, I might ramble a little bit, but I'll try my best to edit it out. So the topic of this video is, the comparison between MapleStory 1 and MapleStory 2. There's already going to be some people who will bring the argument that those two are completely different games, and to an extent, yes, I agree, but they do have very fundamental and rudimentary aspects to them that I think can definitely serve as a medium grounds for comparison. So I guess I'll go over it in a topic by topic basis, but why am I comparing these two games? In my personal opinion, I think MapleStory 2 is less of a new game and more of a refreshing experience. So I think a lot of the hype that we have for around MS2, which it's purely completely justified, of course, but I think a lot of the positivity about the game that's currently out right now is just overhype. For all we know, it may or may not deliver to our expectations, and it could just be kind of blown out of proportion a little bit. We'll have to see. I have very good hopes for this game, and I really think it can go very far depending on how well Nexon takes care of it while managing MS1, because both games will be running at the same time. And I don't play MapleStory 1 anymore, but if MS1 goes under as a result of MS2, that actually isn't good, because then if MS2 goes under, we lose the entire fan base of MS1. So ideally, if one of the two games have to go just due to the fact of lack of resources or maybe just player abandonment, I would say MS2, just because I think MS1's much more rooted in the community than MS2. However, that's not to say that I want either game to fall apart. It's just that if one, you'd have to choose the lesser of the two evils, I would go with MS2. Let's just talk about, I guess, the features of MS2 that, is different from MS1. Well, for one, obviously, it's 2D versus 3D. I really like the new graphics system. The way they presented the game, I think it was done very well. People would they would often harp on the game saying, oh, it's like MapleStory and Minecraft put together. I wouldn't disagree with that, but there's nothing wrong with a cute blocky mechanic that you would add to it, and a nice, an isometric 3D view with just chibi characters. That's pretty cute, right? I think it's going to appeal to a lot of players. Not to mention, that is MapleStory in a nutshell. Despite the overall demographic and player base being early 20s or higher, now there are some people who still play it in their teenage years, but the original target audience, which was 8 years old, 9, 10 years old, we just all grew up and we kept playing the game as we went along, and not too many new players have entered into the community. So we have to understand, if we go back all the way to the very beginning, that Nexon's mission statement, or Wizit back then, was to have a very cute atmosphere to the game. And I think Nexon did a good job by keeping it that way, as opposed to making it a very mature, serious, and somewhat edgy game. I think it's nice, because the art style, it's very important. If you maintain the certain essential experience that you have in a game, you want to keep it that way. Of course, there's also the advent of the new quest line systems and dungeons and raids. So far, I really like it, but that may just simply because that's the best way to do it, and I think that is how you should be playing an MMORPG. There should be an aspect to grinding, but it should always be an inferior choice to quests. Even prior to that, you would see people training in Hennis's hunting grounds in MS1, or going to Sleepywood to do some grinding there. That's all well and good, but I think the majority of your experiences, especially when you play an MMORPG, until you reach a certain point, which in MS2 is level 50, it should be done by following the quests. The same happens in Final Fantasy XIV, where you would, until level 40 or something, you would follow quests exclusively, just because that is the most efficient way to farm and level up your character. Also, it gives you a very nice, I guess, it's like a tour. Obviously, if you're exploring a new place, we'd say go to college, or you're going on vacation, it's always, you're all more than welcome to explore the place yourself, but if there's a more guided aspect, or, a guided method to do so, why not choose it? It's you don't really have anything to lose. Plus, you can get some good benefits and mechanics, or you get some good knowledge, benefits, mechanics, and also you get items. That's always important. And if we take it even further, there's the dungeons and raids. That's something I really like too, is that I haven't quite dabbled into it yet. I've been mostly focused on final projects and final exams and such, but there's a huge aspect to the game that focuses around doing dungeons and raids. Now that's obviously true in MS1 as well, but in MS2 you have to, I guess, for the sake of your survival. I mean, it's a very big minority, just kind of like an oxymoron, that some players, they just play the game for the sake of either picking up some players, they like to get good by just like living in the free market all day, the merchants and such. And that's fine. I actually think the free market system in MS1 is pretty nice until players just stopped taking advantage of it too much, and it just became a hub for botters that sold elite boss drops. But in this game, you have to do dungeons and raids, which will also encourage like a bigger party aspect to it. Another thing that they introduced is modern item mechanics. So, as you guys know, in MapleStory 2, there's no such thing as mana. There's only stamina points, which is technically your mana, or I guess you can call it energy in a sense. Like if you were to refer to, or making like an analogous or example for League of Legends, like energy champions. I think that's really nice because that means you can't really just like spam all of your abilities, which is technically what MS1 has devolved into. As long as you have enough potions, or as long as you have enough mana, you can just keep spamming your abilities. There's no real incentive for you to be like more sparing with your usage of attacks and your abilities and such, because you could just keep doing them over and over again. Not only that, but restorative items and curatives such as potions and the like, they have built-in cooldowns to them, and most of them, if memory serves, they don't regenerate your HP instantly. It's usually over a period of time, and the ones that do have the immediate gratification benefits to it, they are usually very low in terms of potency. That's that's a pretty common occurrence you see nowadays in most video games, in that they don't make health potions just something that you can spam. Back in old MapleStory, the restoratives that we would have were usually like red, orange, and white potions. So even though you could spam them, you usually had about 2,000, 3,400, 4,000 HP, which means you had to use quite a bit of them. Also, potions back then were not the easiest to come by because of the fact that you just, and you'd often hear, especially like even in Lionheart Castle when you're training for like a couple hours back in like the old days of 2011, 2012, they would always say BRB, repot, and stuff like that. Or I remember you would especially when you were making a brand new class, you would go to Pyrian, get a junior bogey familiar, and that'll be like your MP battery. Now, because of all the events that happen and all just like the overall increase in frequency of restoratives, such as especially the power elixirs, which is a full heal in both HP and MP, potions have become so common in MS1 that you can literally you don't need to buy a single potion from an NPC, and if you do, you're doing something wrong, which I like. I think that's also a very good aspect to the game. It definitely increases the skill ceiling. You can't just charge it and just spam all your potions and face tank everything even at level 1. So we'll see how that goes. I haven't, like I said, the knowledge I have on this game is fairly limited, but it's just based purely on what I've read, what I've watched, and a little bit of playtime that I had. Next, we have the class skills. We're gonna see a lot of familiar, occurrences in terms of abilities and such. The priests, you have a lot of abilities that are common and, that are the, exact same thing in MS1 and MS2. But the application of these abilities is far more different. Due to the new art style of this game, and I guess the overall positioning mechanics being in the form of cubic meters and such, positioning definitely plays a much bigger importance than in MS1, which was just a 2D platforming game. That means that a bit better, I guess, preparation prior to going to dungeons and raids and such like that. Okay, we can designate this spot to be a safe spot or something like that. It would definitely encourage a lot, despite MS2 in my personal opinion being more casual, you can do far more to really make up for your lack of resources. In MS1, most of the time, the only reason why you couldn't kill the boss was just because you weren't strong enough. Sure, there are instances where you would have a sufficient mechanical ability to take them out, but more often than not, it's just because your gear was not that great. But in MS2, a bit more strategy is required because simply that it is a 3D game, which means you can position a bit better, you can dodge more skills. To my knowledge, there aren't that many abilities in this game that are lock-on, so positioning is definitely much more important, and you can just dodge abilities much more often. So we'll have to see how that goes, but I'm really liking just the overall gameplay mechanics to the game, and I think it could definitely add a much higher skill ceiling than it did in MapleStory 1, because MS1, let's be honest, it's not a very hard game in terms of mastering your classes. Moving into the social aspect though, which I'm sure most of you guys care about most, is that party play is pretty much an almost essential requirement for the game. I believe they added a lot of limitations to the game, to the classes, to make it so that you can't just one-man mode bosses like Zakum and stuff like that back in the old days. And how long they're gonna hold that, I'm not entirely sure. But it is certainly a refreshing experience because, pre-Big Bang or old MapleStory, you had to do everything like a 30-40 man party. So it'd be really exciting to see the raids that come into play with not entirely sure how many players you need to accomplish something, but I believe it's 5 or 3. However, I think you can come in with squads, so maybe they might bring expeditions back. There's also going to be a very large influx of rapport and camaraderie between players, especially with the features that they added such as the mini-games, the housing system, and more open communication throughout the game. It's just, right now there's only one server, which is Scania, and that's been like that in the KMS2, which means that maybe they will never release any other world besides Scania in GMS2. The player base, I feel like because it's much more concentrated and consolidated in a specific or a single server, it'll be a lot easier for you to interact with players and not bring up the argument that you live in a dead server. That, and of course, being a new game in and of itself, it's going to bring many players together. It's just the new game hype. Every time a game gets released, there's always a ton of people who want to try it out. How many people are going to stay after day 1 or week 1? It all comes down to how good the game is. But take advantage of the game as best as you can because it is a new game. The best time for MapleStory 2 right now, I think, hopefully, actually, no, not hopefully, I would rather it be awesome throughout the entire years to come. It's going to be very good in the early parts of the game because when it comes out, it's the grand opening. Everyone's going to want to give it a shot. Now I brought the topic about there being a much better chance for you to interact with other players and bond with each other, and with the new features. And speaking of those new features, I love that they're adding a customization aspect to the game. MS1 has become a giant, excuse my French, a shitfest of just perma-NX and crap. And while they have been releasing a large variety so you can freely express yourself, a lot of games, I think, they really open and welcome, or they're really open to, and they also welcome the player's, I guess, sense of expression. You go to Minecraft and there's a finite amount of things you can do, but how you want to express them up is completely up to you. Of course, then there's skins. In MapleStory 2, we have customization such as designing your own clothing. How they're going to avoid copyright, I'm not entirely sure, because you can literally make your character look like any Marvel or DC character or anything, and that might be a very big problem for intellectual properties and disputes. Although we'll see, maybe they might have a means of recognizing if you're copywriting something, but it'd be interesting to see, you're cosplaying in the game. And there's also, to my knowledge, I think there is also a way you can design your own music. There are instruments in the game, which would be fantastic. I think that would be a very interesting thing you could do. You can make your own theme and then play it in your house. Speaking of housing, there is housing in this game. Quite possibly my most anticipated feature to the game, that you can actually start to get your own house. You can build it, you can customize it, and you can even get a house with your guild mates for a guild headquarters, and you can then work around that. I saw that feature in Final Fantasy XIV, and I was really disappointed that MS1 didn't have it, despite being a much more established MMORPG. But it's better late than never. I think for MS1, a housing system would have been much more impractical because it's a 2D space, but in MS2, since it's a 3D space, there's a lot more you can do. And I think that also will open up a big money sink. If furniture and customization require a ample amount of mesa, it'll be a lot more difficult for inflation to occur because you're spending the money, you're spending money that isn't being directly recycled back into the game. It's just overall MS2, it adds a lot more ways that you can stop and smell the roses. MS1 was pretty streamlined, right? And sure, you can dabble around, you can, just fool around and such, but the features that they added, they eventually became stale, and I guess they never continued on with that. But MS2, the sandbox aspect of the game is going to be definitely a very large boon to the game, and I think that will encourage a lot of other type of players who aren't entirely into MMOs to get into MMOs, because MS2 is basically Minecraft and MapleStory put together. So why, in my opinion, do I think MS2 is better than MS1? I'm not a huge graphics player. There's some games that have graphics far worse than games that have AAA level graphics but are 10 times the game that those games will ever be. You do need presentation. One of the most important things in anything, in life, whether you're running a business or a restaurant or anything like that, is fantastic presentation. And I do love the way that they had their art style all planned out. It reminded me a lot about Cube World. I'm not sure if you guys remember that game. It's still technically in the works, but I think Wale is taking his time. But with MS2, the way they designed everything, the characters, like, you know, and the fact that they kind of look like Nintendo Mii's, and just the overall very cute aspect to the game, it's very bright and colorful. I think that's definitely going to be a much more enjoyable thing to see. MS1, they had great graphics in terms of, you know, the visual representations of the game, like, you know, the backgrounds and such. But MS2, you can take that even further, it becomes a lot more immersive. I already stated this before, but MS2, there are more things you can do than in MS1. You know, sure, they have things in MS1 that you can do, such as they have events that run mini games and such, but there's only so much you can do with a 2D platforming game. But if the 3D game, 3D open world exploration game, a lot more things you can do. They're adding things like, you know, mini games that you can play with friends. You can design your own clothes and design your own music. Their housing system, which I think is honestly all that they need, but they added a lot more. And just like the increase in customization and planting a sandbox attribute into the game, it makes the game, it increases, I guess, player retention, because you can get bored of the game very quickly after you achieve everything that you set out to achieve. Like for me, once I geared up and I got 2 mil range, or I became one of the top players in MapleStory, it was just boring. Like, what else do you do? It's like, you beat the game, you have like a party of like a full man party of like all level 100 Pokemon. What else do you do at that point? There's not much you can do. But in MS2, because it is part sandbox, you can continue playing even after you quote unquote beat the game. One thing about MS1 that a lot of people really enjoyed, especially in the old times, is that it took, you know, progress was meaningful. However, due to a lot of the players nowadays being older and having far less time, plus I guess society's attention span in general, the fact that we're not really used to, you know, the meta for games right now is switching towards MOBAs or FPS, much more immediate gratifying games. And if we were to try to, you know, people are saying, bring back old MapleStory, I guarantee you a lot of people are going to complain about the fact that it takes 8 hours to get from level 1 to level 20 or something like that. So they changed it up a bit. Rather than progress being meaningful in the form of just, they made it harder to achieve progress, you can then get, there are more ways to achieve that progress. So one person's prerogative might be like, I want to get the best gear in the game. Another, like the prerogative for another person would be, I want to make the best house in the game. So the fact that they're branching goals and destinations you can have in the game, it adds more to the things that you can do. Of course, there is a risk to that, and I'll get that later, but that's definitely one thing I think, or the main central thing about MS2 that has its edge over MS1, is that there's just more to do. Modern mechanics. MS1, it's heavily outdated as an MMORPG, I would say. MS2, fortunately, because it's a quote-unquote new game, has been able to incorporate those mechanics, and therefore, I guess just by purely gameplay, from a gameplay standpoint, it'll be much more superior to MS1, but we'll once again have to see how that goes. And last but not least, 3D, it adds more depth to gameplay than 2D. Don't get me wrong, MS1's great in terms of, I guess, the concept of the game. The execution is terrible, of course. With 3D, you can definitely expand your horizons much more. Like, you can take Terraria, for example, and you pit it against Minecraft. Terraria has a lot of things that are pretty similar to MapleStory 1. It's, to me, I think if it is more of an MMORPG than like a sandbox game, Terraria I find myself getting bored of more quickly than Minecraft, just because if it's a 2D thing, there's only so much you can do, especially once you fill up the space that you have. So those are the reasons that I can think of right now that make MS2 better than MS1. Now we'll go over to why MS1 is better than MS2. If you're looking for a MMORPG, you want to play MS1. MS2, it is an MMORPG. There are aspects to the fact that make it an RPG, a role-playing game, but they really capitalize on the aspect, or they really try to make a central focus on the creative aspect of the game, the fact that you can just wander around and do whatever the hell you want. So if you want a more streamlined feel to an MMORPG, I do suggest that MapleStory 1 is better than MapleStory 2. The game is also more fluid in terms of progression. Because you can deviate away so much from in MS2, you may not really notice like how far you're going into the game, and you might end up like thinking, okay, I'm just basically wasting my time. Now that is the main point of a video game, is mostly just for entertainment. But if you're a person who really cares more about like the satisfaction of improvement, then MS1 out of the two. Obviously, there are much better games out there like League of Legends or Overwatch where you get immediate benefits and gratification. But if you're talking about just these two, I think MS1's definitely much better. They have a more, I guess, accommodative system for players who want to play a video game just for the sake of like getting the best of what they can get. you play Pokemon, you have those players who are like, oh, I just want to get everything to level 100, or rather, you compare those with the players like, I just want to enjoy the game for what it is. If you're the former, I think MS1 is much better. And speaking about that, MS1 has a much more established ideology and I guess modus operandi than MS2, which means that the first game is more stable. I did say this earlier that MS1 would be the better game to keep alive if one of the two had to go down. I'm not saying I want MS2 to go down. However, it's just MS1's been around a lot longer, and despite MS2 seemingly having many more things that you can do and being I think a more overall fleshed out game, not flushed, I think it still would be more prudent from like a business perspective that Nexon keep MS1 around, and they probably will. So if MS2 doesn't seem to be doing too well for global, it didn't do very well in Korea. For global, it may be different because we have a different demographic. We have a far larger population of players and we have a different culture. I see people in Korea. I've talked to a lot of players who have been playing KMS, and they usually like to they take the game very seriously. You go to KMS compared to GMS, it's like there are a ton of henny hoes or like NX, perma NX people, or people who are just like, fooling around in like the free market. You go to KMS, it's like full of people who are just like man moding it to get the best damage and such, or like trying to increase their gear. So that's probably why MS2 didn't do so well for Korea. Now, I'm not generalizing, of course. I'm not trying to be racist or anything. I'm Korean myself, so we'll have, but I do think that there is a type of culture in Korea that definitely focuses more on the competitive aspect, especially since we go into Overwatch or Fortnite, PUBG, or League of Legends. Like, Koreans are usually the best. I'm not too concerned about MS2's performance when it really releases to global. However, that's like something that we definitely want to keep note of. So I've been sort of putting MS2 on a pedestal, and I think it deserves it to some reasonable extent because I think it's a great concept. I think as long as Nexon doesn't mess it up, they will have a far better game than MS1, but there are some obvious problems to it. Trying to push a new product over an old concept may be pushing the envelope a little bit. Now, if you guys are wondering what that is, it's kind of like poking the bear. They're kind of pushing their luck a little bit with that because, you see a lot of games that make a 2 version or whatever, and they usually do poorly. Like, for instance, Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon for Pokemon Sun and Moon hasn't been doing too great. I mean, it's still a great game, but it's just a lot of people think that's just, Game Freak or Nintendo trying to like get a little bit more money out of the fans. Same thing, it will alienate a lot of players, I think, due to the whole purist aspect of the game. I saw this too with, let's say you compare Ragnarok Online with Ragnarok 2. It's not the same feeling. These two are completely different games, and people who are so accustomed and used to MS1 and want to keep it that way will be very displeased with the way MS2 has been delivered. And I'm not one of those people. I'm very open to change. In fact, I had to deal with a year's worth of change, probably for worse, I would say, but I think it's made me a bit stronger. I'm more welcoming to it, but I can understand those who maintain a more purist mindset or are like, no, this is not MapleStory. It doesn't feel that way. I have that same kind of perspective with, let's say, Fire Emblem Heroes, where I don't believe that game to be anything like Fire Emblem. I feel like it's just them taking a JRPG and then slapping the Fire Emblem label on it. So it's kind of like that. They're definitely facing a risk by alienating a lot of players. However, due to the overall immense positive response and excitement for MS2, like the players in the community, I don't think that's going to be a big issue. However, if let's say old players return back and it's like, oh, what is this? This is just basically MS and Minecraft put together. That's a pretty valid argument that you can bring up, in that it's just a combination of two games that are, to some extent, not, it's past their prime. The game also, it's not going to be very fun for hardcore players. Well, we'll have yet to see. Because, like I said before, and I've stated many times, the game is MS2 is definitely a much more casual environment. That's not to say that there aren't competitive or, I guess, serious aspects to the game for people who really want to sink their teeth into it. I'm going to be definitely trying to push to be like one of the best assassins in the game, and I'm also going to try to make my guild one of the best guilds in the game. However, there's definitely a large element of quote-unquote fun in the game, and fun usually it butts heads with seriousness. Like I said, I think due to the culture of America, it's going to be not the biggest problem, because most of the time we play games just to have fun, but like in other countries, playing video games is more of like, it's your life. It's like something you have to do. It's your duty. So we'll see how that goes. Another thing to bring up is that MMORPGs, they're falling out of favor. Definitely not as good as they used to be back then. The reason why they were such a novel concept back in the old days, from 2000 to 2010, was because it was the first introduction of multiplayer interaction in the form of video games. Back then, we had only, Game Boy Advance, we had maybe GameCube. Wii was the first one, or Nintendo DS, I think, was the first one to have like Wi-Fi communication. But prior to that, it was just all in-house. But with multiplayer games coming out, it made it a lot, players really got to enjoy the fact that they can interact with more people besides their peers in real life. Now that's not so much a novelty anymore. So that's kind of the case. Also, I think I brought this up before, but that society in general is becoming much more impatient. Now, I don't know if that's just because we have much higher standards for games and that we would rather receive rewards within 30 minutes of gameplay as opposed to 8 hours. The majority of the player base in the MS that came from MS1, we're old, right? We've been playing for 10 years, 12 years or so. Like, we're not the same toddlers and youngsters and teenagers we used to be. We're all probably adults by now, and we have a life. We have college, we have jobs, we have. Some people probably have, wife and kids, husband and kids to look after. So a large platter of responsibility has been thrusted on us. And that makes it much more difficult for us to just sit down on our asses and play for 8 hours straight for very mediocre benefit. MS2 is, it's a hybrid of MMORPG and sandbox, which will be probably a good crutch for it. However, just in general, I don't think MMOs have been doing that great. You see a lot of companies still trying to push them out. I think there was Ashes of Creation and such. Just only a few of them have been doing really well. Like Final Fantasy XIV is because it had such a dedicated fan base and because it was it's a very well designed concept. Or something like World of Warcraft, which I don't know how good World of Warcraft is doing right now, but you guys get the idea. They're still releasing a ton of MMOs that do well, maybe for like a month just due to hype, and then they just like flop out completely. We're gonna have to see how well MS2 does. It does have a very reliable fan base, however limited at this point, and maybe it might attract new players. We'll have to see. I'm not entirely certain that MS2 is going to be like in a very stable position. You're basically gonna be walking on eggshells if you're watching this next time. You're gonna be skating on thin ice for a while before it really establishes itself. And then, unfortunately, ultimately, I think MS2 will fall into the same fashion that MS1 has. The game is very awesome and pure right now, but eventually we'll have like the MS2 version of Big Bang. I wouldn't put it past Nexon. I know that, they're a company. You guys, I know that everyone harps on them, and even I harp on them for making the game MS1 way too pay to win, but they're a company. They have to find some way to make money. It's just that if they make it the very cardinal way to progress through the game, that's when things become bad. Pay to win should never be the best way to get, it should be the best way, but it shouldn't be the only way. That's not to say that you couldn't get super godly damaging gear without spending a dime. It was just extremely inefficient and extremely impractical, and hardly anyone took that route. Only a few people to my I know by name have been able to do it without spending any money. And in return, they ended up spending many hours in the game, which they could have turned into money. They always say time is money. If you spend 4 hours playing a game, you can spend 4 hours getting a job, stuff like that. I have very little hope that MS2 will, veer off a different direction. I'm not being pessimistic in that case. I think it's just due to we look at the information, the empirical data, and just like try to think about it in a very realistic standpoint. Eventually, I feel like there will be a time when party play is not required, when players they build up the characters' gear, their classes' gear, or classes get buffed or like revamped, new classes get introduced. The power creep will eventually come and eat MS2 alive the same as the way it did for MS1. How long it takes for that to happen? That's what I'm hoping that Nexon will do a little bit better. And then also just in general, sandbox games ever since the release of Minecraft have been hit or miss. You see some games that do very well, like, does Gary's Mod count as a sandbox game? I'm not sure. But then we have Terraria. No Man's Sky, it did very poorly when it came out, and then they sort of like buffed it and they rehauled it and things started to work a bit better. But ever since then, Minecraft set a very high standard for sandbox games and that every other game development company has been trying to match, and most of the time they've failed. So let's see how it goes for MS2. I think once again, because we're anchored by a very strong player, not a very strong player base, but we have a player base. It's not like a brand new game coming out. I think MS2 will be a lot more stable. However, be mindful that like there are definitely key weaknesses to this game that will probably not be or it'll be inevitable. They will come eventually. It's just like I said, it's a matter of time. How long it takes for those bad things to happen, it all comes down to Nexon. If they do a very good job, this game could be far better than MS1 with a far larger player base and a far bigger community. However, if they mess up, which is much easier to do than do well, then we're gonna have a it's a big failure of a game that, you know, it's a failure for both MMORPGs and sandbox standards. So after I said all that, should you play MS2? Yes, it's still a new game and a new experience. I'm gonna be playing MS2. I'm not playing MS1. I haven't been playing MS1, or I'm done with MS1 and I'm moving on to MS2. I want this game to succeed. I want this game to do well. So I guess you guys can join the ride with me and hopefully things go well. But I think I have definitely very high hopes for this game. I think Nexon, hopefully, I'm not gonna say they will, but I pray that they will be able to take the mistakes from MS1 and perform much better with MS2. There's also the fact that MS2 is a collaboration between Nexon and another company, so I think if any executive decisions were to be made that were to probably upset the players, they would care a lot more about it, because it's not just Nexon, there is another company. So it adds like a checks and balance system. Nexon can't be like, oh, this makes us a lot of money, let's put it in, fuck the player base. There will be a conflict of interest that will help probably keep the game in check, and I think it'll increase the influence that the player base has on the game. And I think, you know, I think it's gonna work out. I like the game. I think a lot of you guys like the game too, just by the hype that's been going on. It's been hyped to us for 3 years, so I think we're gonna have a good time for at least maybe 2 or 3 years. I think that's a pretty fair assumption we can make. And if things do go sour, I guess we can always go back to MS1. There's nothing wrong with that. But I don't know if I'll be able to. This video has been like over 30 minutes long. I do apologize for rambling. It's like the same video I made with why MapleStory is losing popularity, but I guess this one's also going to be very sloppy. And if you guys did watch this far, thank you so much for watching. And if you want to leave your thoughts and comments in the description below, I'm more than open to suggestions and discussion. Just make sure that you keep it civil and polite. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, as long as you don't attack other people's opinions. I'll be moderating the comments to some extent, but it all depends on how many comments I get. But those are just my 2 cents on it. And I did warn you guys at the very beginning that this was going to be a live commentary podcast type thing. It's not going to be a structured one. And to have to write a script that lasts the span of 35 minutes, we're talking like probably like a 50-page essay, maybe more. Regardless though, thanks for watching, guys, and let's just hope, right? I believe it's going to work out. I think it really will. I used to think that MS2 was just Nexon's, you know, ideal of trying to like squeeze out a bit more money from us by putting a quote-unquote new concept into the game. But after giving it more thought, just sleeping on it for a while, letting it sit for a while, I think it really is a different experience. I've been taking, you know, as you guys know, if you've been following me for a while, I am currently studying in game design and development at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and I've opened my eyes a lot to how games are run and created and designed from a designer standpoint, a developer standpoint. And I think the essential experience, which is, you know, a pretty big buzzword in the program, the essential experience of the game is definitely much more different than MS1. For better or worse, we'll have to see how it goes. That's gonna be it for now. I'll see you guys in the next video. Once again, comments in the comment section for discussion, always welcome. And if you can, leave a like. If you want to see more videos like these, I'll be pushing a ton of MS2 content out because, well, I'm not doing MS1 anymore, so it'll be a lot easier for me to move my eggs. Anyways, I said that like 20 times now, but I'm really leaving this time. I'll see you guys later, and take care.